7 minutes after the top of the hour, Her Excellency, Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori Quao. Good morning. Welcome back to the program.
Good morning, Carl. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for being so patient with us. We've got so many issues in our community that we have to address that nobody else seems to want to address. But thank you for being so patient with us. But first, let me ask you this, though, about the organization that you found, the ADDI, the African Diaspora Development Institute. Can you tell us, why did you create this?
Well, it was part of my mandate during my tenure as the African Union Ambassador to the United States to mobilize African diaspora and encourage them to participate in the development of Africa. I quickly realized that there was a huge void in us as people not understanding what Africa has to offer for us, which is our birthright. And so I started the awareness program where I was traveling around the Americas and educating and informing the African diaspora, who are all people of African descent living outside Africa. African diaspora are all people of African descent living outside Africa. So if you're African American, Afro-Latino, Afro-Caribbean, Africans who were born on the continent, now living outside Africa, you're an African diaspora. The important message I have for everyone is that Africa is under siege. Your birthright is under attack. Africa is being exploited and will be taken over by the Chinese, the Europeans, the Indians, the Arabs, everybody except us. So ADDI is on a mission to wake up the children of Africa, let them know that your birthright is under siege and you have a responsibility to take the driver's seat and participate in the development of Africa, not only for your benefit, but for the benefit of your children, grandchildren, and generations to come.
Yeah, that's the missing link for many of us, so that our birthright is on the continent. We've seen the Russians now very involved in Africa. Speaking to the people in the diaspora, how can we help? How can what is needed? What does Africa need that we can provide?
I think what we need right now as a people is, first and foremost, is the awakening. We are simply not awoken. We don't even realize that we are still suffering from the legacy of slavery and colonization. We have been brainwashed to such an extent that our ability to love ourselves, our ability to work together, our ability to believe in ourselves and in each other is completely destroyed. So first thing first is to wake up and realize that we've been brainwashed and we need to work towards undoing that damage. Secondly, we must first of all accept the fact that we are Africans. You have many African Americans who don't even want to be called Africans. If you don't want to be called an African, then what are you? The German Americans are quite happy to be called German Americans. The Irish Americans are quite happy to be called Irish Americans. The Jewish, all other Americans, with the exception of the American Indians, they're quite happy to identify with their countries of origin. So when you run into African Americans who don't want to identify with Africa, wherein lies the disease? Why are you running away from your heritage? One looks at you, they see a black person, an African. And until you otherwise explain or you start talking, so why are you running away from your heritage? Again, back to the legacy of slavery. We were taught to hate ourselves. So the biggest battle that we have to have as a people is the mind. Accepting who we are and reconnecting with our anchor. That we must do. So first and foremost, let's wake ourselves up. Let's understand that Africa is home. The richest continent on earth is your birthright, and you're running away from it. And then you sit and you struggle. Opportunities that you would never have in a million years in the Americas or in Europe, they're there in Africa waiting for you. All we need is to wake up and organize. The Chinese are going to Africa not because they love the Africans, it's because there's something amazing and wonderful there. If you were to fly into Africa today from Europe, from everywhere, Australia, India, the people who are in those planes don't look like you and I. Then you have to ask yourself, why are they going to Africa? So you got to be stupid if you don't realize that there's something going on there. And what is going on there for me was sad is it is yours, but you're running away from it. So for me, the biggest battle that we have to deal with is waking our people up and saying, wake up and smell the coffee. It's not by surprise that all the rest of the world is going to Africa. Everybody knows it. There is a serious battle for Africa, and they are battling for your inheritance. They are battling for your birthright. Are you going to continue to be stupid and still deny it? It's mind-boggling. So for me, that's where I want to begin. We must wake up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because, one of the questions when you say that, they say, well, I don't know where in Africa I came from. Am I from the Gambia? Am I Kenyan? Or I'm a South African or Namibian? Or and they name all the states, African states. So they say they can't, they don't know which one to connect with. What do you say to those folks?
Again, that goes back to the same nonsense we're being taught. As an American, do you care where you were born? You were born in New York, but you now live in California. Does that bother you? You just need to know you're African. You're from the continent. Where you come from doesn't really, on the continent specifically. You can do a DNA testing, but we're saying the continent is yours. You pick and choose where you want to go. So we're in the process as ADDI, through the Pan-African Congress, we're going to be pushing for citizenship, where we are saying you should be able to pick and choose what country you want to become a citizen of. We know you're an African. The continent is yours. Don't be divided. The continent is yours. And we want you to pick and choose what country you want to be a citizenship of, and there's a pathway for you to become a citizen. So don't be divided. Who cares if you're from Togo? Do you care if you're from Georgia and now live in California? So if it works for that in America, why are you dividing yourself when you go to Africa? You are an African, and the buck stops there. And that's the message we should be.
Excellent response. 14 after the top of the hour. Ambassador Quao, we got to take a short break here, check the traffic and weather in our different cities. When we come back, though, address this question, because you mentioned it at the top, and people talk about it all the time. Say Africa is the richest continent. They say, well, how come the people are so poor if Africa is the richest continent? I'll let you address that when we get back. Folks, you want to join this conversation with Ambassador Quao, reach out to us at 800-450-7876. Your phone calls in 4 minutes right here in Baltimore on 1010 WOLB. In the DMV, we're on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. Good morning again, family. 21 minutes after the top of the hour. Thanks for rolling with us this morning. Our guest is Her Excellency, Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori Quao. Dr. Quao is the AU ambassador. She's also a medical doctor. And something I neglected to mention, even with our first guest, Jude Azad from Haiti, they were all the same. It's just, as the old saying says, same trip, just different ship. Your ship, for Jude, who was with us early, explaining what was going on in Haiti, his ship stopped in Haiti. Some of us stopped in St. James or in the Carolinas or Baltimore's Eastern Shore, or stopped in Panama or somewhere else, Jamaica or anywhere. We're one people. This is what Dr. Quao is trying to explain to us. But Dr. Quao, before we left for the traffic and weather update, my question to you, because I get this question all the time, because people, and you said it earlier in the opening, that we have the richest continent in Africa. And they say, well, if Africa is so rich, why the Africans on the continent are so poor? Can you answer that for us?
Absolutely. You have to understand that when the Westerners came to Africa and invaded Africa centuries ago, they found an amazing continent with everything they could ever imagine, everything that they even did not have. So they set out to figure out, how can we conquer such a people who have everything? And so the only place they could think of was the mind. And then after they conquered us in the mind and got us to subdue, they proceeded to put in a system to exploit our natural resources. You have heard of the common saying where they came in with a Bible and we had the land. They taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. And by the time we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible. And nothing has changed ever since. And I'm saying this sincerely to say religion has been used to destroy Africa. Religion was used to get us to give up what was ours. Africa has been exploited since the Westerners came and colonized the continent. And we are still struggling to get our grip back. We're still struggling to get our continent back. When we were given the quote-unquote liberation, we had to fight, of course, all over the continent. to fight the colonizers so we could take back our land. What we got was our land. What we got was limited political liberation because they still control the political processes using their invisible hand. But what they never gave us was the economic liberation. The multinational companies that existed in Africa during colonization, they continue to work in Africa today. In most African countries, they remain the major employers. So because of that, we are still under siege economically. We have not attained much needed economic liberation. So until we receive and we take back our economic liberation, we are still, to a great extent, we're still enslaved. Political liberation alone is not enough. We need economic liberation. Sadly, the systems they have put in place, geopolitical systems, they're talking financial systems, they're talking trade systems, trade policies. Those are all designed to make sure, for example, the World Trade Organization, the policies were such that Africa will always be the provider of raw material. So if a country like Ghana, which is one of the largest producers of cocoa in the world, and by the way, 6% of cocoa beans, they come out of West Africa. For centuries, West African countries were not allowed to add value to their cocoa beans because the Europeans wanted to add value, create jobs for themselves, and of course, make all the money. It wasn't until just 4 or 5 years ago that Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire started producing chocolate. They were forbidden. If Ghana tried to create, to add value by creating chocolates or creating hot cocoa, the tariff on those value-added products was so high that it wasn't even worth the farmers or any investors in the country to do so. So adding value to natural resources was prohibited through policies from the World Trade Organization, which is an international organization. Just to put things in perspective, you can go into any hotel, into any restaurant, you're going to see Swiss coffee, Swiss chocolates, Swiss this. There's not a single cocoa plantation in Switzerland. And yet, African products are taken to Europe and relabeled as coming from another country, and the World Trade Organization is giving it a blind eye. Let's come to the World Financial Policies, the World Bank, the IMF. Their sheer existence is based on the premise that their success is based on the failures of developing nations, majority, of course, are in Africa. So it is that African countries that have never defaulted on their loan repayments, they are being charged exorbitant interest rates, 15, 20%. Whereas Western countries, some of them have defaulted on their loans. They get their loans 1%, sometimes even zero interest rate. So the injustices are everywhere. So for that reason, the average African country is paying 50 to 60% of their GDP goes towards loan repayment. How can a country survive on that? They know it. So they want to keep African countries chasing their tails. So the geopolitical systems are making it difficult for Africans to dig themselves out of the conditions that we were put in during slavery and during colonization. So wherein lies the problem. Until the systems that were put in place are dismantled, it's going to be very difficult for African countries to survive and truly build the Africa that we want. It gets even worse when you look at how these same systems that were put in place specifically for Black people, it doesn't matter where you see a Black person on earth, they are being exploited. They are being restricted to access funds for economic development. Look at the redlining in the United States, clearly designed to make sure that there is no economic empowerment within Black communities. Black people are expected to stay at a certain level. Black people are expected to be the labor for the world. So you go to Brazil, you go to South America, all of South America. You go to the Caribbean, the Chinese are taking over, the Westerners are taking over, and we are workers. You come to the Americas, Black people, we are workers. You go to Africa, Black people, we are workers. So there are systems, geopolitical systems that are put in place, and then they go down all the way to the community level to keep us from attaining that economic empowerment. You can take it back to slavery, what they did with policing to make sure that Black men are in prison. They're just systems that exist even at the community level to this day, that make sure that Black people do not attain that economic liberation that everybody else has an access to. So it is by design that Africa is where it is today. But that is why it is imperative that everybody is acutely aware of the games that are being played. Everybody is acutely aware of the invisible hands that are constantly making sure that Black people remain where they want us to be. And therefore, when we wake up and we understand the game, we can then organize ourselves in a more meaningful way, in a more sustainable way, to make sure that we stand up and fight and defend what belongs to us.
All right, 30 minutes at the top there. You mentioned the chocolate industry, but isn't that a probe to just all the minerals, everything that Africa has? They're taken out of Africa, and then the finished product, the Africans, they sell them back to Africa, sell them back to us, like the chocolates, but they sell them back to the Africans too, so they have to buy the finished product. Is there a way that Africa could eliminate the middleman and create these industries ourselves?
The problem is, to start with, we don't have the funding. So if we had the funding, then we can compete on equal footing. Let's use an example of a president who needs a high-speed rail built from one end of this country to the other. But it takes money, and it takes those with funds to do the bidding. As Black people, we don't have billion-dollar accounts. Now, the difference is the others, they don't have the billion-dollar accounts, but they're trusted by banks to be given access to those funding in order to bid for such a large contract. That is where we are being lost in Africa. Development is needed, and development calls for financial backing. We don't have access to the financial backing. Those who are coming in from outside, they're getting the financial backing that they need. We are even being told that countries like China, yes, not everybody is a prisoner, but there are cases, reported cases, where they are sending their prisoners right from prison and giving them some money to get started in Africa. I was told by one headman in a village, he said, Ambassador, let me show you something. We went to a location along the river where they were doing alluvial gold mining, and they were abandoned equipment, mining equipment. He said the Chinese came. In 6 months, they had made so much money that they abandoned the equipment because the equipment was now insignificant compared to the amount of money they had made. 6 months, they were multimillionaires and they left Africa. So we don't have the funding to get started. Those Chinese were given the money to buy that mining equipment. So they came in and did mining at a grand scale, and in short order, they'd become millionaires. We don't have that money to play at that level. So that's where we continue to be defeated. And that's why it is imperative that as individuals, we don't have the money. But if we were to come together and pull our funds together, oh, yes, we have the money. And that, again, is where we are defeated. That ability to say, let's believe in each other. Let's believe in ourselves. So as ADDI, we are saying we understand people are afraid of going to Africa, but our first headquarters is in Zimbabwe. We're saying if you are a person of African descent and you want to try and figure out how you can get started investing in Africa, we have a home. Come, let us know in advance. You come just to visit. We will show you around. We will show you the opportunities. You can come as often as you want until you are comfortable. Because, of course, you have to be comfortable as well. So we are going to assist you. So the plan is to open Africa houses throughout the continent. Our first Africa house is in Zimbabwe, and we welcome diaspora. Go to our ADDI.org and just join, become a member. It's free. And then just begin to get engaged. We want to make it easy for you to come to Africa, to where there are people who can welcome you. I'm talking to the country of Ghana. During the Pan-African Congress in 1994, one of the outcomes was that there's going to be a secretariat in Uganda. And so that secretariat is beginning to become very important, and it's going to be the go-to place for everything African. So we're strengthening the secretariat, making sure that there's a place that if you want to go to Africa, there's one place you can call and say, I want to come to Africa, but I want to go to Kenya. We'll call the secretariat. We're working on it, and I'll be coming back to you once we have the secretariat set up, and that is the place, and we're getting government funding for that secretariat because it is needed. So yes, the fear is there, and we understand that people are afraid to go to Africa. But as ADDI, we are saying, let's simplify the process of the children of Africa coming home. Come home, take a look. Let us show you. Don't be afraid of Africa. They are lying to you. Africa is an amazing continent. They say don't go to Africa, but they're going. We're also saying, children of Africa, we get you. But we are going to simplify your process of coming home. Come home, see what home has to offer you. And don't be stupid.
All right.
Do it for children and generations to come.
All right, hold that thought right there, Ambassador. We got to take a short break here. We've got to get caught up on the latest news, traffic, and weather. When we come back, Isadora in L.A. has a question for you. Folks, you too can join this discussion with Her Excellency, Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori Quao. We'll take your calls for in 4 minutes right here in Baltimore on 1010 WOLB. Also in the DMV, we're on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL, where information is power. And good morning again, family. 20 minutes away from the top of the hour with our guest, Her Excellency, Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori Quao. It's talking about the ADDI, the African Diaspora Development Institute that she created, trying to create that link between us in the diaspora and the African continent. Before we go back to it, let me just remind you that tomorrow's Friday, of course, you all know that. We're going to give you another chance to free your mind and join us for another edition of Open Phone Friday. Begin promptly at 6 a.m. Eastern Time right here in Baltimore on 1010 WOLB, also in the DMV on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL. Ambassador Quao, Isadora in Los Angeles has a question for you on line one. Isadora, you're on with Ambassador Quao.
Good morning, Carl. Thank you for taking my call. And good morning to you, Dr. Quao. I admire your work. I've lived in Nigeria, and what I found while I was there was the greed, the poverty level, the desperation, and lack of unity. Not a serious thinking leadership. So when you have a problem where you have lack of leadership, tribalism, religion, and greed, and as an outsider, unable to speak the language or really comprehend what's going on, I've found a lot of misconception on the part of the people where they exploit. They take your money, they make a promise, they take your money, and they run. Whereas when it comes to other nations, white people or Indians or whatever, they're given a hall pass. So how do you go about changing the mentality of those that are in charge?
All right, let's give her a chance to respond, Isadora. First, I thought she was describing the United States, but Isadora, thank you for your call. Ambassador Quao?
Thank you for making that comment, and thank you for your question, my sister. Let me start by saying what you are describing in terms of greed, in terms of selfishness, it is universal. In fact, you'll find that some of this selfishness and outrageous abuses of power and exploitation of the people are in the West. So let's be very clear that even as you went to Nigeria, you took on a different hat and started seeing things in Nigeria as if they were unusual, and yet those same things are happening in your own home country where you live. Let me give you a simple example. I was watching television 60 Minutes years ago, and there was a good Samaritan doctor who was helping Black people, homeless people in Harlem. And the pitch on CNN was the Good Samaritan doctor. These were people in the gutters with filth and rats and mice. And so it was like, oh, the good doctor. The second episode was talking about Nigeria. the streets of Lagos. And the spin was, oh, how can the government do this? These are homeless people and people are hungry. People are doing this. And again, we are brainwashed into saying, oh, how can the government do that? Well, why didn't you were programmed to admire the doctor and be grateful for his work, but you were also programmed not to realize that what the filthy hallways and back alleys of Harlem, that shouldn't happen. It was in New York City. It should not happen. So blame the government too. But you're programmed to then blame the government when there are filthy streets in Lagos, but filthy streets in New York, you did not think about it that way. Let's also protect ourselves. That there's a lot of spinning going on. People are people. People will cheat you. People will take from you if you allow them. So corruption is everywhere. So don't go to Nigeria and see corruption as if it's an isolated situation in Nigeria alone. No, corruption is all over the world. In fact, when you look at the grand scale, there's a lot more money, billions, trillions, lost in corruption in Western world. I'm not saying what's happening in Africa is good. I'm just saying go look at it in the proper perspective. That's one angle. The second thing is you have to understand the genesis of why African countries are where they are today. Yes, Nigeria may be in a little bit of a different situation in the sense that it is a very rich country. But then when you look at the oil that's in Nigeria, why is it that the oil in Nigeria has to leave Nigeria first to be refined before it can come back? Again, there are games being played to make sure that raw materials in Africa, they're going to create jobs for those outside the continent. So understand in general the genesis of why Africa is. Yes, what you saw is real, but I want you to look at it in its proper perspective. Why are African countries forever chasing their tails? Nigeria could do better. It is the richest country in Africa. It has oil. Thank goodness we now have one of the richest guys in Nigeria. He's putting up the biggest refinery. So hopefully we can begin to see Nigerian oil being refined in Nigeria and not having to leave Nigeria first, travel thousands of miles to be refined for us, only for us in Africa to then buy the oil. There are those technicalities, common sense kind of things that our leadership needs to begin to stand up and push back, but understand the genesis in general as to why Africa is where Africa is. But you're quite right. Leadership must do better. Leadership can do better. But while we are talking about leadership, let's also understand the fact that in some cases, and a lot of African countries, that is the case, leadership's hands are tied. Their ability to move their countries forward are hindered. If you take countries that were former colonies of France, to this day, most of them still have to send over 50% of their bank reserves to France. For no good reason. Just send your bank reserves to me. They've been doing it for over 50 years. Most of those countries, any contract, big or small, public or private, it has the French companies have first right of refusal. So if a contract then does not have a French company that wants it, then and only then can a local person get it. So the local people are going to continue to be perpetually poor. So when the people are poor, they're going to do what they need to do to survive. So my sister, your question is very valid, but I want you to take a step back and reassess the situation and also begin to understand the politics behind why Africa is where Africa is today. And the former French colonies are a perfect example of what is happening. Today, as we speak, there is a French desk at the presidential palace. There is a French desk at the foreign ministry. There is a French desk at the country's central bank to make sure that what France wants gets done. So there is still a lot of control of African countries. Policies that were put in place over 50 years ago when they were getting our quote-unquote independence. So there's more to the story. What you see are the effects of some of the underlying policies that really need to be addressed head on. In many cases, when African countries have tried to address some of these issues, many heads of states were killed. A lot of unnecessary conflicts within the country will occur. So when you begin to understand the geopolitics, the games that are being played to keep Africa in a turmoil, because an Africa that is in a turmoil, an Africa that is in conflict, is an Africa that is easy to exploit. So while Africans are busy chasing their tails, they're in and siphoning whatever it is natural resource that that country has. You take, for example, all the different coups that are taking place. Those are proxy wars. What we, the average person, don't understand is what is the real reason this conflict is taking place. Why is this coup taking place? They don't tell us that behind it all, there is a natural resource. You take Niger, you take Burkina Faso. Those are some of the countries that are very rich in uranium. But they don't tell you that when conflict is created, it's because they begin to realize their grip on the uranium, they're losing their grip on the uranium. So let's create a conflict. Let's create chaos over here. So that grip can be let go so we can continue to either protect the uranium and keep it for ourselves or continue to siphon it out of the country. France is heavily, I think like 30% of France's electricity is powered by nuclear. So it's important that they get their uranium from Africa. Otherwise, they're going to run into issues. I'm simply saying, I'm giving you a quick overview of when you hear a story, when you see a situation, ask for the story behind the situation. Ask for the story behind the story. Because quite often what you're seeing, what you're being told, is really not what is really going on. So look at your Africa and ask, what is really going on besides what I can see with my naked eye? But your question is valid, and I can understand why you saw things that way. But just think a little bit deeper and look a little bit deeper and ask the right questions so you won't be a victim of being fed false information. We have been miseducated. We have been misinformed for far too long. We simply ask everybody to stop and think and not just take what you are fed as gospel.
All right, that's great. So 8 minutes away from the top. I'll come on another quick break. And I've been to Nigeria. I came away with a different vibe from Nigeria. Nigeria is very vibrant, especially Lagos. If you like New York, you love or Vegas, you'll love Lagos. It never sleeps. Been to Abuja, the capital as well. There's a marina out there. Two of the richest black men are from Nigeria, by the way. We should always point that out. As I mentioned, we got to take a break. Brother Hakiza has a question for you. I know you have an event coming up. We want to talk about that next month. It's going to be at Howard University as well. But folks, you want to figure out if you want to help the continent, what you can do, what your role is, just give us a call. If you think that you're considering moving, and a lot of people are saying they're moving to Ghana now. I understand that Kenya is opening up the doors for businesses. They want to get in on the diaspora, people who want to go to Kenya and do business. They're opening up their doors. Well, this is a one-stop shop. This is what the ADDI is. If you want to go to Africa and you've got a skill, let's go there and just hang out. But you've got a skill and you want to really develop that skill or got a business plan, you need to talk to Dr. Quao. Reach out to us at 800-450-7876. We'll take your phone calls in 4 minutes right here in Baltimore on 1010 WOLB. Also in the DMV on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Keep rocking.
Good morning again, family. A minute after the top of the hour. Thanks for rolling with us all morning long. We appreciate the company. Our guest right now is Her Excellency Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori Quao. She's a medical doctor by trade, but she's also the creator of the ADDI. This is and they're having an event, by the way, the African Diaspora Development Institute. They're having a festival at Howard University later this year. You got questions about that? Reach out to us at 800-450-7876. Brother Haki's joined us from Baltimore. He's on line one. Brother Haki, you're on with Dr. Quao.
Yes, greetings and good morning to you, Your Excellency. It's great to hear you.
Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, well, first, let me just thank you. I've been selected by you to be one of the awardees at the event at Howard University. So I am certainly excited about the opportunity to meet you again and to meet all of the ADDI brothers and sisters. the 75 chapters that will be coming to the DC area. And I work with the DMV chapter under the leadership of Dr. Stella Jeffries. She is very committed to this work with ADDI. So we are excited for this opportunity and for you to come and present the Arikana Excellence Award.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you.
Yes, ma'am. So I just want to, so I'll put out the website, if I may, ADDI Marketplace, for those that desire tickets. And, you know, there's a special half-price tickets going on till August the 5th. So I just want to encourage everybody to go and get tickets. There's sponsorship opportunities as well, and through vending opportunities. So ADDImarketplace.com. But I wanted to mention as well, and I'll ask a question. You know, we have the opportunity. I'm the president of the Teaching Artists Institute, and we've been offered the opportunity by the National Council of Arts in Zimbabwe. Brother Nick, I believe his name is, but to come. I mean, each year we do what's called an artist, and we work with artists all over, you know, Africa. And last year we were in Kenya and Tanzania and South Africa, and this year we'll be coming to Zimbabwe. And so can you just share, you know, just in terms of, you know, many people, you know, like when I went to the United Nations, you know, I was very impressed that there were some people out, you know, some black people from here protesting against the sanctions against Zimbabwe that's still going on. So if you can address the status of what's going on with the United, you know, the Western powers in terms of Zimbabwe. And we are, just again, I'm excited to see you in person and at Howard University, September the 28th and 29th. And I thank the DMV chapter and all of the chapters for pushing it to make this happen. Thank you again.
Well, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your support of the DMV chapter and ADDI, of course. Looking forward to seeing you in September. Well, when it comes to the sanctions against Zimbabwe, well, this goes back to 23 years ago when the government embarked on the land reform. The land reform was part of the agreement that was reached between the Ian Smith regime, which was Rhodesia, and the Fighting Liberation Forces of Zimbabwe, who were Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF, and Patriotic Front, which is now the combined Zimbabwe African National Union and the Patriotic Front. So the agreement was that there would be no land redistribution from 1980, which is when Zimbabwe got its independence, for 10 years until 1990. And then after 1990, the government would begin the land redistribution program. Keep in mind, at that time, we were looking at over 80% of the arable land was owned by 250,000 people. Let me repeat, over 80% of Zimbabwe's arable land was owned by 250,000 people, who were the white Zimbabweans who lived in Zimbabwe at that time. Of course, that was extremely unfair, and so the land reform began in 1990, in which case, according to the Lancaster Agreement, it's called the Lancaster Agreement because it was held in London in the house, the Lancaster House. The building itself was called Lancaster House. And so the agreement was the Lancaster House Agreement. Basically, the government would then put out a program where they would notify the white farmers that their land has been identified for redistribution. Keep in mind, most of these farmers, they owned an average of 10 to 50,000 hectares. I'm not exaggerating. Thousands of hectares. So a hectare is 2.2 acres. So if you got 1,000 hectares, you're looking at 2,200 acres. Many of them had 10,000 hectares, 20,000 hectares. Oppenheimer of Oppenheimer Funds was a Zimbabwean. His farm in Zimbabwe was larger than the country of Belgium. One man. He owned over 2 million hectares of land in Zimbabwe. How can one person own such land? when in the periphery of that farm, there are thousands of locals who are squatters with nothing. So the injustice was just rampant and blatant and bad. So the land redistribution needed to take place. The government simply said, if you are a white farmer, you are guaranteed 400 hectares, which is still like 1,000 acres of land. So you, out of your 10,000 hectares, out of your 20,000 hectares, you pick up your 400 hectares that you want, and you are guaranteed that. So you pick that up, and then the rest of the land we are going to redistribute to others who need to have it. But that's when the white farmers began to fight the Lancaster Agreement. They started creating goalposts. They started saying, of course, Britain was supposed to pay for the land redistribution and compensate the white farmers, because the government said, we don't need to compensate you for the land because you didn't pay for it. There were some that ended up with stake title deeds, which were created towards the end to make it look like they bought them, but majority did not buy that land. They were just given that land. That's when Zimbabwean problems began. They started creating all kinds of stories, and Britain do not send the money to Zimbabwe. The government is going to take the money. There's too much corruption. In a nutshell, the white farmers did what they could to stop the land reform. And of course, the government pushed on, and we are where we are today because the government pushed on and insisted that their people must get the land. And now Zimbabwe has taken its land, and the people have their land. Let them do what they want to do. Because the government took a position to say, we will push forward with the land reform. We don't care what you think. This is what we went to war to fight for. We spent decades in the bush for the land. Mission must be accomplished. If we do not give the land back to the people, then we would have gone to fight in vain. Zimbabwe has been under sanctions ever since. They will try to tell you that the sanctions are targeted only to individuals. That's not true. American companies are not allowed to do business with Zimbabwe. I mean, I was looking at buying an MRI, assisting a hospital in acquiring an MRI machine. Come to find out, even Siemens cannot you cannot purchase an MRI machine directly from Siemens. So Zimbabweans have to wait until the machine goes to a neighboring country, then buy it from a neighboring country. So American companies are not allowed to trade with Zimbabweans, and so it's complicated. But at this point, I'm sure a lot of the Congress people, once they get to know what the real story is, they're against the sanctions. These sanctions really do not need to continue. They really need to be lifted. It just doesn't make any sense to continue the sanctions against Zimbabwe, simply because the country wanted to take back the land and rightfully give it back to the owners. To have one person owning thousands of hectares and call that fair, it is absolutely mind-boggling. Some of these Western countries and how they think. But again, it's being done to black people, so they don't think they should think beyond that. They can abuse black people and get away with it, and this is just one blatant case of abusing and bullying an African nation for doing what's best for their people. It's sad, but they do it because they can.
Yeah, let me jump in here for a second, Ambassador Quao. This, I think, if memory serves me right, this was started with Tony Blair out of the UK. He's no longer in office, and we've changed president since then. Why are the sanctions still in effect? Why hasn't it been canceled? Do you know?
To be honest with you, all I can say is because it is being done to black people. If Zimbabwe was a white nation, none of this would be going on. But because it's being done to a black nation, and there are some with special interests, and that's why the sanctions are continuing. There's just no rhyme or reason as to why sanctions should continue. They all know it. These sanctions really need to be lifted. There is just no justification for the sanctions to continue, except that they do what they do because they can. I mean, you look at all the things that the European nations continue to do to Africa. They do it because they can. What we need to do is to also begin to say, Africans must begin to look from within Africa. So such that if Africans start trading with each other, start looking from within Africa, then the sanctions will no longer become an issue. But because we are still looking outside for our needs, that's why the sanctions will continue to impact us to some extent. But Zimbabwe has survived 23 years of sanctions and counting. So it's a sad story of not only Zimbabwe, it's a sad story of African nations, black nations. Look at what is being done with the financial situations in the Caribbean. They're trying to squeeze Caribbean countries financially. You squeeze them financially, they're finished. So stifle growth in the Caribbean nations, stifle growth on the continent. It's a strategy against black people, unfortunately. And the sooner we realize as black people that we come together and speak with one voice, that is the only way we can defeat this abuse and exploitation of black people, really. Even it goes all the way down to black neighborhoods, even in this country. It's a strategy, it's a plan that's put in place to keep us where they want us to be. So the situation, the issue of sanctions in Zimbabwe is just one small part of the bigger agenda across the globe. The game that's played to keep certain populations where they want them to be. And that is the story of us as a people, sadly.
All right. At 13 after the top, they'll come on a quick break. Check the traffic and weather. Al in Las Vegas has a question for you. Folks, you want to join this conversation, reach out to us at 800-450-7876. When we come back, though, Ambassador Quao, why don't you tell us about the Francophone nations, too? Because, you know, the English-speaking countries, we're all tied to the colonizers' language now. How are you getting your message over to the Francophone brothers and sisters who are tied to the French language? How are you getting your message across to those folks as well? That's my question for you. But as I mentioned, we got to step aside and get caught up on the latest traffic and weather in our different cities. We'll be back in 4 minutes with Ambassador Quao. Ailes, calling from Vegas, has a question. You, too, can join us right here in Baltimore on 1010 WOLB, and the DMV on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL, where information is power. And good morning, family. Thanks for rolling with us all morning long. 20 minutes away from the top there. Our guest is Her Excellency, Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori Quao. Dr. Quao created the ADDI, the African Diaspora Development Institute, having a big function at Howard University in September. And we want to know more about that before we leave this morning. But Dr. Quao, before we speak to Al in Vegas, my question to you, because right now we're speaking to the English-speaking members of the diaspora, and then we've got the colonizers who took over our Francophone brothers and sisters. How is this message getting over to the people who just are proficient in French?
Well, to be honest with you, I think we need to do a better job at also reaching out to our French-speaking African nations. As ADDI, we do have, like in New York, we have a French-speaking ADDI chapter. So the French people do participate, but we have a French translator, and the chapter itself, they have their conversations in French. We also have a French-speaking chapter in France, in Paris, and another one in Brussels. And so, but that's not enough, though. We need to do better at reaching out to our brothers and sisters who are from the French-speaking countries. The outreach needs to get better. It's not enough. We are not doing enough to reach out to them. So that's another area we need to work on. Even your show right now, we could try and have a translator who can be translating as a simultaneous translation as the program is going on. So you two need to do a better job, just like we need to do a better job as ADDI to reach out and make that connection, which is very much needed.
That's a good point right there. Maybe, you know, with all this intelligence we have, and we've got some smart brothers and sisters all over this planet, they can do that. If the show's going on in in English is simultaneously being translated into French, so or Portuguese, wherever our brothers and sisters are scattered. Hey, so I'll just throw that out there. So somebody, I know we got some smart brothers and sisters all across this world who can create that, who can make that happen, get up the software and do that, so we can communicate with each other. That's an excellent point, Ambassador Quao. 800-450-7876. Dr. Stella Jeffries is joining us. Dr. Jeffries is in Maryland. She's also the charter chair for the ADDI. She's on line one. Dr. Jeffries, you're on with Ambassador Quao.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Ambassador, Her Excellence Ambassador Dr. Arikana, Chihombori Quao. Good morning, Mr. Nelson. Thanks for taking my call. This is Dr. Stella Jeffries, the ADDI DMV chapter chair. I would like to say we're so excited that Dr. Arikana is coming to the DMV in September the 28th and 29th at the Howard University for the ADDI Afro United Festival. Dr. Arikana, thank you for coming to speak on Black empowerment, for advocating for social and economic issues affecting the Black community, for speaking about culture preservation, that we must preserve our cultural heritage as African diaspora. And I would like to say to all the DMV chapter members, let's come together and let's make this a grand event. Let's show the world that we are united and that we have royalty as Africans. So, Dr. Arikana, thank you for your message. I'm 100%, 120% vested into ADDI. And we're going to continue to do this every year. We're going to continue to do it in every chapter, every state, every globe. The world needs to know that we are, as Africans, we are united. So I would like to say thank you. Thanks for taking my call. And I'm looking forward to this great event. All of the DMV folks, come together. Let's come to Howard University, September 28th and 29th, and let's celebrate this event as one people. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Jeffries. 24 after the top there. As I mentioned, Elle's in Vegas has a question for Dr. Quao. Elle's on line 2. Elle, your question for Dr. Quao.
Greetings, Carl, and greeting to your guest, Dr. Quao. As always, Carl, appreciate what you do, and you just got to keep it going. We got to keep it going some way. But my question is very quickly. I just want to go to the root back before colonization, before that landmass was called Africa, before, all the way back. How does that what we call Africa now let this new man come in, take over, flip the whole dynamic, comes on top and puts I don't know what the name was back in the beginning. We're going to the beginning and subvert and just change the whole dynamic to where the wise man is now subservient to the new man. How did that originally happen, please?
All right. Thanks, Elle.
It's a journey on its own. The original name for Africa, and there are different names, depending on different times, but most people would know of Al-Kebalan. Al-Kebalan was the other name for Africa, but I'm sure if you research it, you're going to find some other names as well. Be it as it may, like I said, when the invaders from the West came to Africa, they found an amazing continent with its own well-established educational, religious, legal systems. A continent that was fully equipped to take care of itself. But they came out with an eye to steal, with an eye to destroy, and an eye to plunder everything that they could get their hands on the continent. So they set out to destroy us where it mattered the most, which is the mind. Because they knew there was nothing they could teach us that we didn't already know. So, but if they could destroy us where it matters the most, then it would be easy for them to take over our continent. And they did precisely that using religion. So it is through religion. Some of you may be familiar with the King Leopold letters, where he specifically had a systematic way of training the missionaries on how to brainwash the Africans. Comments like teach them how to read, but not to reason. They put a system in place to make Africans believe that everything African was bad and that everything European was better. They put systems in place to systematically abuse Black people to a point where we are afraid of our own shadow. To the same extent that the Willie Lynch letters in the Americas were being used to train other plantation owners on how to break a slave, much to the extent that you break a horse. The same methods were being used to break the African. Why? When we had our wars of resistance, many kingdoms fought and resisted occupation by the West. But because we were fighting with bows and arrows and they were fighting with guns, we were defeated at every turn. As we speak today, just to show you how they were brainwashing the Africans the same way Willie Lynch was training the plantation owners in the Americas. They would hang those who led wars of resistance, the kings, the community leaders, the chiefs who resisted occupation. They would hang them on the public square. They would play the same games where they would tie one leg to one horse facing in one direction and another horse facing the opposite direction, and then start whipping the horse so the man can be split in two. The same ways of brainwashing the Black people after they were defeated were used to brainwash just like they did in the Americas during slavery. So once we were defeated, then they continued to use all kinds of methods to instill fear in us. And that fear remains to this day. The missionaries were actually not sent to spread religion, but rather to use religion as a way of subduing the African, teaching us that our riches are in heaven, that blessed are the poor, that it is very difficult for the rich to enter heaven. So all those games, manipulation processes were employed upon the African, to where the same methods are still affecting the African today. The same way that they said, Willie Lynch said, you do this repeatedly to a slave for a year, they are going to now be on automatic pilot of self-refueling for the next 400 years. The same games were being played on the continent. What ails us today as Africans is that we are almost incapable of pushing back, standing up, and refusing continued occupation. If I were to use the 14 French-speaking countries and a document they were made to sign, which is called the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, you all can look it up. The Pact, PACT, for the Continuation of Colonization, which basically says you're going to give me, at that time, it was 85% of your bank reserve. And that's it. You send it to France, you'll never get it back. But if you need some of it, you have to put in an application as a loan at commercial interest rate, your own money. And you can only access about 20% of what you deposited the last year. What you deposited 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's gone. It's not yours anymore. And France will take all those deposits, invest it in the French stock exchange, and whatever the returns are, they are to the benefit of the French, and the countries never have to know what is going on. Through the reinvestment alone, France is taking trillions of dollars out of Africa. The question then becomes, why aren't we today, 2023, pushing back and saying, that's not right. It is wrong. It's because of that fear. But also you can say, even that fear is real. Because in the past, when heads of states have stood up and said, no, France, we can't keep sending all our bank reserves to you. We need the money to take care of our people. Those heads of states were assassinated. So it is a complicated story. It's a complicated situation. But the manipulation and the exploitation and brainwashing of the African has been going on ever since the invaders from the West descended upon Africa. Like I said in the first half of the program, that they came with the Bible and we had the land. By the time we opened our eyes, because they told us to pray with our eyes closed, they had the land and we had the Bible. and we have not been able to undo that damage. You can go to homes of black people in all over the world, really. Religion is what has been used to destroy us, even in our communities. You'll see a blue-eyed, blonde-haired white Jesus, and try telling the black people to take down that blue-eyed, blonde-haired white Jesus. Because we know Jesus was not white. Jesus was a black man. Jesus, the Bible says, he had crimson skin and hair like me. When Mary and Joseph were running away from King Herod, they were told to go to Egypt. Why Egypt? Because Egypt, there were people who would look like him. He would blend in. If he was a white man, they would have told them to go to Europe. These are some basic facts that even us as black people today, not in leadership, black people in the United States, black people in the Caribbean, South America, try telling them to get rid of the white Jesus, because Jesus was not white. They won't do it. It is the same brainwashing that goes back to Willie Lynch, that goes back to King Leopold's letters. And until we heal from that, our ability to stand up and fight and defend what's ours, the blatant abuses of black people around the world, they can no longer continue. But our ability to unite and fight against those forces are limited because of we are defeated in the mind where it matters the most. As we speak, there are many African leaders who go back to colonization, whose heads are still sitting in jars in basements in Europe today. They were beheaded because they had the audacity to fight, to stand up and fight and resist occupation. Why is it that in 2023, those heads are still sitting in jars in Europe, and our leadership has not stood up and said, let's have our leadership back. We need to give them proper burial. Because they were
Hold that thought right there, Ambassador. We got to take a short break. Our last look at the news, traffic, and weather for this morning. Folks, you can join this conversation with our guest, Her Excellency, Ambassador Dr. Quao. Reach out to us at 800-450-7876. Your call's in 4 minutes right here in Baltimore on 1010 WOLB. Also in the DMV, we're on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL, where information is power. Hi, good morning again, family. 19 away from the top of the hour. Our guest, if you're just joining us, is Her Excellency, Ambassador Dr. Arikana Chihombori Quao from ADDI, a group that's setting up a connection between Africans in the diaspora to Africans on the continent. Earlier, she told us that the Chinese are there, and they're running the businesses, and they're getting the diamond mines, and the Russians now, we know that. We see that in the news. The Russians are there as well. But let me ask you this, Ambassador Quao. Are they taking root in Africa? Are we seeing young half Chinese, half Russians running around there? Are they building? Are they setting up shop in Africa, or are they just taking the money out and leaving?
Oh, they're setting up shop. I haven't looked up lately, but a few years ago, one Chinese guy brought me his laptop and says, Ambassador, look, these are Chinese men looking for African wives. There was actually a website where Chinese men are looking for African women to marry. Oh, and yes, they are married. So we do have black Chinese-looking children all over the continent. They are setting their roots. Yes. Right now,
let me ask you this though: the men are coming, but are the Chinese women, are the Russian women coming as well to work, or they're just sending their men?
Oh yes, the women are coming. Like we have lots of Chinese restaurants actually run by Chinese. The women are coming too. I remember I was at the airport in Addis Ababa, and I mean it looked like it was a whole plane full of Chinese, every generation. There were elderly women, elderly men, children of all ages, and men and women in between. It was like a whole tribe was just dumped at the airport. I couldn't believe it. They're coming, all ages. They are moving to Africa.
As I understand it, in South Africa, they had their own police department in South Africa. Was that true, or was that just some internet talk?
Well, what it is, that is done in the name of protecting whatever they have. So their own police is protecting their assets. But yeah, they do have in some areas their own security in their own communities, yes.
So what you're saying to us now that we have communities where the Chinese and the Russians just live all by themselves in Africa?
Yes, yes. We have over 10 million Chinese. We have over 10 million
10
Chinese.
million.
Over 10 million, yes.
And they're the merchant class. They're running businesses. They're not coming there just to hang out, I take it.
No, they're not workers. They're employers. Yes. They're owning. They're owning. And they're usually into big things like mining and big manufacturing. They don't come in small. They come in big.
So I guess this is the reason why you're so adamant that we need to go back and take over those businesses from those folks, those foreigners, if you will.
Well, we don't even have to take over what they have. There's still plenty that we can also just take on our own without taking what they have. That's why the opportunities are still there, but this situation is not going to last for very long. And when, pretty soon, give it another 2-3 decades, there just won't be anything left for us to take, except we're going to be relegated to work for them. And that's the sad part for me. I can see the writing on the wall. It's going to happen. We are going to be workers in Africa. Rather than being the employers in Africa, we are going to be relegated to being workers. We are workers outside Africa. We're going to be workers inside Africa. And that's our sad reality.
Yeah, and the other part of it too, Ambassador Quao, some of the African leaders have mortgaged the future of their countries for trinkets from these Chinese and the Russians. Can you address that issue?
Yeah, you can't blame them. On one hand, we're saying to the African leaders, we want development. We want that brand new airport. We want that brand new port. We want those brand new highways and railways. Where are the black people to build them? Where are they? I was talking to one president, and he said there was funding that was coming from some European nation. I won't mention which one, and it was $1 billion. And the agreement they were putting in place was that 60% of the contract for the development that was going to be funded by the $1 billion must come from that country, which was the Western country. So the president was saying, if I had a way of knowing that there were black companies that can take the jobs, they could have then inserted in there that of the 60% that are going to come from companies coming from that country, maybe 30% must be black companies. He said, but we can't do that because we don't know if there are black people who are ready to take over those contracts. So we have ourselves to blame because we are not organized. Look at the situation with the Atlanta airport, with Mayor Maynard Jackson. When he said he was not going to approve the airport unless they found black companies. Initially, white companies were saying, we can find black companies. So they had to go out of their way to find black companies because we are not organized. So yes, the African heads of state, they want development. People are demanding development, but the people who are available to develop the countries don't look like you and I. That is our reality. And that's why we have to own it. It is a serious challenge for African leaders. They want the black people to develop Africa, but the black people are simply not there. And that's unfortunate.
And why is that?
Because we are disorganized. Look, call right now. Do a survey. How many black people would go to Africa right now? Call up on 100 people. Would you go to Africa today if the opportunity was around? Look how many will say yes. They're all afraid of Africa. What are you afraid of? How long do you have to be stupid? White people are going to Africa in masses. Chinese are going to Africa. Middle Easterners, Arabs, Indians. Everybody's going to Africa. But black people are afraid to go to Africa. We are so stupid. The brainwashing that we were put through centuries ago remains to this day. The truth is in our faces, but somehow it's easier for us to believe in the lie. It's just like the case I used of the Jesus Christ. Tell me why black people don't want to get rid of a white Jesus Christ. It's stupid, but we were programmed to be that way. We were programmed not to believe in ourselves. We were programmed not to believe in each other. And until we heal from that disease, the others will steal from us in broad daylight. The others will continue to exploit us in broad daylight. And we are waiting for somebody to do it for us, because that's part of the programming. So
what do we need to do to start this deprogramming?
We need, people just need to have a serious conversation with image in the mirror, because it is the image in the mirror that it begins. Why don't you trust yourself? Why don't you want to go to Africa? What are you afraid of? Understand why you feel Africa is to be afraid, to be feared. Why is Africa to be feared?
And we're on out of time, but I got to ask you this question, Ambassador Quao. Two of the richest black men on this planet are Nigerians, Africans. Why can't we? And we've got some brilliant black folks all across this planet. We created stuff, we built stuff, we've got the money. Why don't we create our own bank? Why don't we just create a bank and do business with ourselves? Why can't we do that? What is holding that up?
Bingo! You hit the nail in the head. Some of the richest black people are right here in America. Why can't all these celebrities in LA and all over the country, why can't they come together and say, enough is enough? Let's have our own bank. They can do it. All they have to do is move their money from the bank they are using now to a new we can call it African American bank, we can call it Pan-African bank, whatever you call it, because the Jews have their own bank. The Indians have their own bank. Everybody else has their own thing except us. It doesn't cost them a penny. It costs them not a penny. Move your money. Take, for example, the churches. They have said about 50 million is collected from black churches every Sunday. And by Monday morning, all of them are lined up to deposit the money in banks that won't even give them a loan. Why is that? It is that disease. Why can't all these black churches come together and come up with a black church bank? Call it whatever you want to call it. Bank your own money. Give yourself loans. Do something that's truly beneficial for you. They can't do it. That's how sick we are. It's so blatantly wrong, and yet we still do it. They come together, they talk about it, but when it comes to doing it, that's where everything stops. We are a sick people. We need healing. And until everybody accepts that, it's going to be very difficult for us to take our rightful place on the world stage. The disease is deep, and we must understand that. A lot of the things that we could do for ourselves, we are not doing. Simple, like you said, the bank, churches. Let's start with the black church. That's 50 million going to white banks every Monday morning. It must go to a black bank. What is keeping us from doing so? It's the mind that was intentionally destroyed. And it is the mind that the healing must begin.
Yeah, that's where we've been programmed to hate each other so much. We're fighting each other. You've been telling us all morning long. Neely Fuller, Dr. Welson's been teaching it. We still refuse. At least some of us still refuse to understand the fact of unity. They hate their own black people than anybody else, which is just a manifestation of self-hate.
Absolutely, and that's where it begins. You see, you go to that boardroom table with a colonized mind, with a mind that is suffering from the legacy of slavery, garbage in, garbage out. The most dangerous thing for a black person today is a black man, woman who is colonized, who is suffering from the legacy of slavery and colonization. That is the absolute most dangerous thing for black people today.
Yeah, and before we go, because we got about a minute left, Ambassador Quao, this meeting at Howard next month, can you if folks want more information, what do they have to do? Do you have an email address or a website?
I think I'm going to have to check back with Dr. Jeffries. I'm not sure what the website is, but you could also go to our ADDI, ouraddi.org. There's information about it and a link that can send you to sign up and register for this event. It's an amazing event. It's an event that we hope we can all come together and begin to do our thing, begin to have our conversations, begin to say, how can we trade with each other? How can we pave the way to go home? Or for me, I would like to see every African American make it to the continent before they die. And we're simply paving the way to say, don't be afraid of Africa. There's nothing to fear Africa. In fact, you should be afraid of where you live. I was with one of my members who has decided to move to Zimbabwe. He was in Zimbabwe for 7 months. He came home to Chicago for 2 weeks. He said within an hour, there were blue lights and sirens everywhere. He said it dawned on him that 7 months in Zimbabwe, he had not seen a blue police light, not once. He just didn't hate. Because the police, they just don't run around, with sirens everywhere. Police are civil. They talk to you nicely if they stop you. But he had never been stopped by a police. Never saw a policeman stopping anybody by the roadside. That's how peaceful Zimbabwe is in many African countries. And yet you are told otherwise.
Yep. Dr. Quao, we're going to let you go. Before we go, let me just tell the family that the website is ADDImarketplace.com. That's ADDImarketplace.com for more information about the event that's going to be at Howard next month. Dr. Quao, thank you. And thank you for the work that you do for our people, trying to get us together. We're working hard. Some of us, headstrong, but we're working hard. Thank you for sharing this information this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. Keep up the great work.
All right, that's Her Excellency Ambassador Dr. Quao. Folks, we got to get out of here. Hope you got the message. Stay strong, stay positive. Please stay healthy. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, right here in Baltimore on 1010 WOLB. In the DMV, we're on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL, where information is power.